127 days. That's how long it had been since my ex-fiancé Marcus Thompson walked into TechFlow Solutions wearing a crisp navy suit and a smile that could fool anyone who hadn't seen him throw my grandmother's engagement ring across our shared apartment in a fit of rage 8 months earlier. 127 days since he shook hands with our VP of Human Resources and accepted the position of Workplace Investigation Officer, a newly created role that would give him access to every employee complaint, every performance review, and every piece of confidential information about the people who worked here, including me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Chen, I'm 29 years old, and I work as a senior marketing coordinator at TechFlow Solutions, a mid-sized software company nestled in the heart of Austin's bustling tech district. For 4 years, I had built my reputation here one successful campaign at a time, earning the respect of my colleagues and the trust of my manager, Robert Kim. I was the person who stayed late to perfect presentations, who remembered everyone's birthdays, who could turn a failing product launch into a marketing success story that had our clients calling for more. TechFlow wasn't just my job, it was my professional home, the place where I had grown from a nervous recent graduate into a confident marketing professional with real skills and genuine expertise. The morning Marcus started, I was in conference, Room B, presenting the final results of our Q3 campaign to the executive team. 3 months of strategic planning, countless late nights, and careful coordination with our development team had resulted in a 40% increase in user engagement and a 25% boost in premium subscriptions. The presentation was flawless. The numbers spoke for themselves, and I could see the approval in the faces around the table. This was the kind of success that typically led to conversations about promotions, increased responsibilities, and recognition for work well done. I was fielding questions about our targeting strategies when Linda Morrison, our VP of Human Resources, slipped into the room and whispered something to our CEO. Her expression was pleasant but businesslike, the kind of neutral professionalism that characterized most HR interactions. She caught my eye briefly and offered a small nod of acknowledgement before settling into a chair at the back of the room. At the time, I assumed she was simply observing our quarterly review process, something HR occasionally did to stay connected, with departmental performance metrics. The presentation concluded to genuine applause and several congratulatory comments from the executive team. Robert Kim walked me back to my desk with enthusiastic praise for the campaign's success and mentioned that we should schedule a one-on-one meeting later that week to discuss my career trajectory. Everything felt aligned, professional momentum, building exactly as I had worked so hard to achieve. I returned to my desk energized and optimistic, already sketching out ideas for our Q4 initiatives and thinking about how to leverage this success into the marketing manager position that would likely open up early next year. It was Jessica Rodriguez, my closest friend at TechFlow and the most talented graphic designer I'd ever worked with, who first mentioned the new hire. She appeared at my cubicle around 2 p.m. with her usual post-lunch coffee and a curious expression that suggested office gossip was about to be shared. "So, apparently we have a new face in HR," she said, settling into the extra chair I kept beside my desk for exactly these kinds of conversations. "Some guy named Marcus something started today. Linda Morrison is walking him around doing the grand tour introduction thing." I looked up from my computer screen where I was reviewing social media analytics from our recent campaign launch. The name Marcus was common enough that it didn't immediately trigger any recognition, though something about Jessica's tone suggested she had more to share. "New HR person?" I asked absently, still focused on the encouraging engagement numbers displayed across my monitor. "I thought they were happy with the current team size." "Apparently they created some new position," Jessica continued, her voice dropping to the conspiratorial whisper she reserved for particularly interesting office developments. "Workplace investigation officer or something like that. Sounds very official and slightly ominous if you ask me." A small chill ran down my spine at the title, though I couldn't immediately articulate why. Workplace investigations typically involved complaints, conflicts, or policy violations, none of which had been prevalent issues in our generally harmonious office environment. TechFlow prided itself on maintaining a positive company culture, and while there were occasional personality clashes or minor disputes, nothing that seemed to warrant a dedicated investigation position. "That's oddly specific," I replied, saving my work and giving Jessica my full attention. "Did Linda mention why they thought we needed someone for that?" Jessica shrugged, but her expression suggested she was equally puzzled by the development. Something about company growth requiring more specialized HR functions and ensuring compliance with workplace regulations. You know how Linda talks very formal and corporate speak when she's explaining new policies. We were interrupted by the sound of voices approaching our section of the office, the kind of measured professional conversation that accompanies workplace tours. I glanced up to see Linda Morrison walking in our direction, gesturing toward various departments and explaining our office layout to someone walking beside her. The man was tall, professionally dressed, and carried himself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority positions. It took several seconds for my brain to process what my eyes were seeing. The familiar profile, the way he gestured when asking questions, the slight smile he wore during professional interactions. Recognition hit me like a physical blow, leaving me momentarily breathless and completely unprepared for what was unfolding. Marcus Thompson, my ex-fiancé of 6 years, and the man whose engagement ring I had returned 8 months earlier after discovering his pattern of emotional manipulation and controlling behavior, was walking through my workplace wearing a visitor's badge and listening attentively as Linda explained our marketing department's role within the company structure. Jessica noticed my reaction immediately, her expression shifting from casual curiosity to concerned alarm. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Sarah, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't respond immediately, my throat constricted with shock and a growing sense of dread as the implications of Marcus's presence began to register. This wasn't a coincidence or a brief visit. He was being given the comprehensive tour reserved for new employees, asking questions about company policies and procedures, taking notes in the leather portfolio he always carried during professional meetings. "That's him," I finally managed to whisper, my voice barely audible even to Jessica, who was sitting directly beside me. "Him who?" she asked, following my gaze toward where Marcus and Linda had paused near the printer stations to discuss something about office equipment access. "My ex-fiancé." The words felt surreal as I spoke them, the collision of my personal history with my professional present, creating a disorienting sense of unreality. Marcus Thompson, the man who had systematically undermined my confidence throughout our relationship, who had questioned my career choices and dismissed my professional achievements, who had made me feel small and inadequate in countless subtle ways, was about to become my colleague. More than that, he was about to assume a position of authority within the company where I had spent 4 years building my reputation and career. Jessica's eyes widened as she processed this information, her gaze moving between me and the approaching pair. "Your ex-fiancé is the new investigation officer? Sarah, that's seriously messed up. Did you know he was applying here?" I shook my head, still struggling to comprehend the situation. Marcus and I had maintained zero contact since our breakup 8 months earlier. Our relationship had ended with harsh words, hurt feelings, and a mutual understanding that we would be better off without each other in our lives. I had specifically chosen not to maintain any social media connections or mutual friends that might provide updates about his life, preferring a clean break that would allow both of us to move forward independently. The possibility that he would apply to work at TechFlow, a company he knew employed me, seemed so unlikely that it had never occurred to me as something to worry about. Austin's tech scene was large enough that the chances of accidentally ending up at the same company seemed minimal, especially considering that Marcus's background was in compliance and risk management rather than the software development and digital marketing services that formed TechFlow's primary business focus. Linda Morrison and Marcus were now close enough that individual words of their conversation became audible. Linda was explaining our open office layout and pointing out various team areas, while Marcus nodded attentively and asked occasional questions about workflow processes and employee interaction patterns. His professional demeanor was flawless, engaging without being overly familiar, interested without appearing intrusive. To anyone observing this interaction, Marcus appeared to be exactly what a good workplace investigation officer should be: thoughtful, professional, and genuinely interested in understanding the company culture he would be monitoring and protecting. Only I knew about the calculating intelligence behind his questions, the way he was undoubtedly cataloging information that might prove useful later. As they approached our section of the marketing department, I faced a moment of decision. I could attempt to make myself invisible, hoping they would pass by without Marcus noticing me, or I could acknowledge the situation directly and control the narrative of our first workplace encounter. Neither option felt comfortable, but years of professional experience had taught me that appearing confident and composed was usually preferable to seeming like you had something to hide. I straightened in my chair and returned my attention to my computer screen, adopting the focused professionalism that had become second nature during my time at TechFlow. If Marcus was going to be working here, I would demonstrate from the beginning that I was an established, respected employee who belonged in this environment. "And this is our marketing department," Linda was saying as they came within a few feet of my desk. "We have a really talented team here. Sarah Chen just finished presenting our Q3 campaign results to the executive team this morning. Very impressive. Performance metrics." I looked up from my screen with practiced professional pleasantness, meeting Linda's eyes first before allowing my gaze to shift to Marcus. The shock of seeing him was still present, but I managed to keep my expression neutral and appropriately collegial. "Sarah," Linda continued, "I'd like you to meet Marcus Thompson, our new workplace investigation officer. Marcus, Sarah is one of our senior marketing coordinators and has been with TechFlow for 4 years." Marcus extended his hand with the same professional smile he had worn throughout the office tour, his expression giving no indication that we had any prior relationship. "Nice to meet you, Sarah. Linda's been telling me great things about the marketing team's recent successes." I shook his hand briefly, matching his professional tone despite the surreal nature of the interaction. "Welcome to TechFlow, Marcus. I hope you find the company culture here as collaborative as I have." The exchange lasted perhaps 30 seconds, polite and unremarkable to any casual observer. Linda made a few additional comments about our department's role in the company's growth strategy before moving on to show Marcus the conference rooms and break areas. Jessica watched the entire interaction with carefully controlled curiosity, waiting until they were well out of earshot before leaning closer to my desk. "Okay, that was the most professionally awkward thing I've ever witnessed," she said quietly. "Please tell me there's more to this story because the tension was so thick I could practically see it." I exhaled slowly, realizing I had been holding my breath throughout the entire encounter. "It's complicated. We dated for 6 years and were engaged for 2 of them. The relationship ended badly 8 months ago, and we haven't spoken since. And now he's going to be investigating workplace complaints," Jessica said, her tone making it clear she understood the problematic implications of this situation. "Sarah, this is a potential conflict of interest nightmare. You need to talk to someone about this." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach drop as I read the words, "Looking forward to working together again. We should grab coffee soon to catch up. M." The message was professionally worded and could be interpreted as nothing more than collegial friendliness, but I knew Marcus well enough to recognize the underlying message. He wanted me to know that our past relationship wasn't going to remain in the past, that his presence at TechFlow wasn't coincidental, and that he expected some form of ongoing interaction between us. I showed the message to Jessica, who read it with growing concern. "This is not okay, Sarah. He shouldn't be contacting you personally on your first day working here. That alone suggests his intentions aren't entirely professional." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of forced normalcy as I attempted to focus on my regular responsibilities while processing the reality of Marcus's presence in the building. Every time someone walked past my desk, I found myself looking up to see if it was him making additional rounds or familiarizing himself with employee locations. The sense of being observed and evaluated, even when he wasn't physically present, created a constant undercurrent of tension that was exhausting to maintain. During our 4 p.m. team meeting, Robert Kim mentioned that we would be working more closely with the HR department in the coming months as the company implemented new compliance, procedures, and employee feedback systems. He spoke enthusiastically about how these changes would help TechFlow maintain its positive culture while scaling to accommodate continued growth. The meeting concluded with reminders about upcoming project deadlines and encouragement to reach out if anyone had concerns or suggestions about our evolving workplace policies. As my colleagues gathered their materials and prepared to return to their desks, I found myself wondering if any of them would soon be filing complaints that would land on Marcus's desk for investigation. The thought of him reviewing confidential information about my friends and coworkers, possibly gaining access to my own performance reviews and personnel file, created a sense of vulnerability that was difficult to shake. That evening, I sat in my apartment trying to process the day's events and figure out what, if anything, I should do about Marcus's presence at TechFlow. The rational part of my mind recognized that he had every right to seek employment wherever he chose, and that our personal history didn't automatically disqualify him from working at the same company. Many divorced couples and former partners manage to maintain professional relationships in shared workplaces without significant drama or conflict. But I also knew Marcus in ways that his new colleagues didn't. I understood his tendency to hold grudges, his skill at emotional manipulation, and his ability to present himself as reasonable and professional while systematically undermining anyone he perceived as a threat or obstacle. The position of Workplace Investigation Officer would give him access to information and authority that could be easily misused against employees who had somehow earned his displeasure. The timing of his arrival also felt suspicious. Marcus was intelligent and well-connected within Austin's professional community. It seemed unlikely that he would have applied for a position at TechFlow without knowing that I worked there, especially considering that our relationship had ended with significant animosity on both sides. His text message suggesting we catch up reinforced my suspicion that his presence wasn't entirely coincidental. I spent the evening researching company policies about personal relationships and potential conflicts of interest, trying to understand what options might be available to address this situation. TechFlow's employee handbook contained standard language about professional conduct and avoiding conflicts that might compromise workplace objectivity, but nothing that directly addressed former romantic relationships between employees in different departments. The next morning arrived with an email in my inbox from Marcus Thompson with the subject line, "Introduction and Collaboration Opportunities." The message was carefully worded and entirely professional in tone, introducing himself as the new Workplace Investigation Officer and expressing interest in learning more about each department's specific needs and challenges. He requested brief meetings with senior employees from each team to better understand TechFlow's culture and identify areas where his role might provide the most value to the organization. The email was sent to approximately 20 employees across various departments, making it clear that I wasn't being singled out for special attention. However, the fact that my name appeared on his list of people to meet with created additional anxiety about the coming weeks. A one-on-one meeting with Marcus would be difficult to navigate professionally while maintaining appropriate boundaries. About our personal history. Jessica arrived at the office with coffee and a determined expression that suggested she had spent her evening developing opinions about yesterday's revelations. She settled into the chair beside my desk and immediately launched into the conversation we hadn't finished the day before. "I've been thinking about this situation all night," she said without preamble. "You need to document everything, starting with yesterday's interactions and that text message he sent you. If he's going to be working here, you want a clear record of any behavior that crosses professional boundaries." I appreciated Jessica's practical approach to what felt like an emotionally overwhelming situation. Her suggestion to maintain documentation was sound advice that my rational mind recognized as necessary, even though my emotional response was to hope the entire situation would somehow resolve itself without requiring confrontation or formal complaints. "I know you're right," I replied, pulling up the email Marcus had sent that morning and showing it to her. "He's already requesting meetings with senior employees. I'm going to have to interact with him professionally whether I want to or not." Jessica read the email carefully, her expression thoughtful as she considered its implications. "The request itself seems reasonable, but given your history, you should probably have someone else present during any meetings. Maybe Robert could sit in as your manager, or you could suggest a group format instead of one-on-one sessions." Before I could respond, my computer chimed with a calendar invitation for a meeting scheduled for the following Thursday. The subject line read, "Department Consultation, Marketing Team Input," and the invited attendees included myself, Robert Kim, and Marcus Thompson. The meeting was scheduled for 1 hour and included a brief agenda focused on understanding marketing, department workflows, and identifying potential areas for process improvement. The invitation felt like a professional chess move, carefully constructed to appear entirely appropriate, while ensuring that Marcus would have legitimate reasons to schedule regular interactions with me. I showed the calendar invitation to Jessica, who frowned as she read through the details. "Well, at least Robert will be there," she said. "But you should probably give him a heads up about your history with Marcus before that meeting happens. Robert's a good manager, but he deserves to know there might be some underlying tension so he can navigate the situation appropriately." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Amanda Foster, one of our junior marketing associates who often sought mentorship and guidance from more senior team members. Amanda was enthusiastic, hardworking, and possessed the kind of fresh perspective that made her contributions valuable during brainstorming sessions and creative development processes. "Sarah, do you have a few minutes to review the social media content calendar for next week?" Amanda asked, carrying a folder of materials and wearing the slightly anxious expression she typically displayed when seeking approval for her work. I welcomed the distraction of normal workplace responsibilities and spent the next hour working with Amanda to refine our upcoming social media strategy. The familiar rhythm of professional collaboration helped restore some sense of normalcy to what had been an emotionally turbulent morning. Amanda's questions were thoughtful, and her suggestions showed genuine insight into our target audience's preferences and behaviors. As we concluded our work session, Amanda mentioned something that immediately captured my attention. "Oh, by the way, I got an email from that new HR guy requesting a meeting to discuss junior employee experiences and workplace culture. Have you heard anything about why they're doing these individual consultations?" I felt my chest tighten as I realized that Marcus was systematically scheduling meetings with employees throughout the company, not just senior-level staff as his email had suggested. Amanda was relatively new to TechFlow and might not understand the political implications of sharing information about departmental dynamics or individual employee relationships with someone in Marcus's position. "What kind of information is he asking about?" I inquired, trying to keep my tone casual while gathering intelligence about Marcus's data collection methods. "General stuff mostly," Amanda replied. "Employee satisfaction, communication patterns, any concerns about workplace policies or management approaches. He said it's part of establishing baseline understanding of company culture before implementing new compliance procedures. The question sounded reasonable in isolation, but I knew how easily such information could be used to identify potential vulnerabilities or areas of dissatisfaction that might be exploited later. Marcus had always been skilled at gathering information, during seemingly innocent conversations, and then using those insights to his advantage when conflicts or opportunities arose. After Amanda left to prepare for her own meeting preparations, I found myself facing the reality that Marcus's influence within TechFlow was already expanding beyond what I had initially anticipated. His systematic approach to employee consultations would give him comprehensive knowledge about departmental relationships, individual employee concerns, and potential areas of workplace tension that could be leveraged in various ways. The rest of the week passed with a strange mixture of normal workplace routine, punctuated by constant awareness of Marcus's growing presence within the company. I heard his name mentioned in conversations about new policies, saw him in the hallway during brief interactions with other employees, and noticed his calendar invitations appearing in colleagues' schedules with increasing frequency. Each small encounter reinforced my growing certainty that his arrival at TechFlow wasn't coincidental, and that his interest in workplace culture and employee relationships extended beyond professional responsibility into personal agenda. The question was what, if anything, I could do about it without appearing paranoid or vindictive to colleagues who only knew him as a competent new hire committed to improving workplace conditions. The Thursday meeting with Marcus and Robert arrived with all the inevitability of a dental appointment I'd been dreading. I spent the morning reviewing our department's procedures and recent campaign performance, preparing professional talking points that would keep the conversation focused on work-related topics rather than providing opportunities for personal subtext or uncomfortable moments. Robert Kim knocked on my cubicle wall at precisely 2:45 p.m., 15 minutes before our scheduled meeting time. His expression carried the mild concern of a manager who sensed underlying tension but hadn't yet identified its source. Robert had always been an excellent supervisor, balancing supportive guidance with appropriate professional boundaries, and I knew he deserved some context about the potential complications ahead. "Sarah, do you have a moment before we head to conference room B?" he asked, settling into the chair beside my desk that had become the designated spot for important conversations. "I wanted to touch base about this consultation meeting. Linda, Morrison mentioned that Marcus Thompson has been very thorough in his department reviews, and I want to make sure we're presenting our team's work in the best possible light." I saved the document I had been reviewing and turned to face Robert directly, recognizing this as the opportunity Jessica had encouraged me to take. The conversation would be awkward, but avoiding it entirely would be worse if complications arose later. "Robert, there's something you should know before we meet with Marcus," I began, choosing my words carefully. "He and I have a personal history. We were engaged until about 8 months ago, and the relationship ended on difficult terms. I wanted you to be aware of this situation in case it affects the dynamic during our professional interactions." Robert's eyebrows rose slightly, his expression shifting from mild concern to genuine surprise as he processed this information. He was quiet for a moment, clearly considering the implications of having a workplace investigation officer with personal connections to one of his team members. "That's definitely important context," he said finally. "Are you comfortable proceeding with this meeting, or would you prefer to handle department consultation through different channels?" I appreciated Robert's immediate offer to restructure the situation, but I also understood that avoiding Marcus entirely would be neither practical nor professionally advisable. If he was going to be conducting regular workplace investigations and policy reviews, I needed to establish clear boundaries and demonstrate that I could maintain appropriate professional behavior regardless of our personal history. "I think we should proceed as planned," I replied. "I can maintain professional boundaries, and having you present ensures that the conversation stays focused on departmental matters. I just wanted you to be aware in case there are any unusual dynamics." Robert nodded thoughtfully, his expression indicating both understanding and a new level of attention to the situation we were about to enter. "I appreciate you telling me. Let's focus on showcasing the marketing team's contributions and recent successes. If anything feels uncomfortable or inappropriate, we can always reschedule or restructure future interactions. We gathered our materials and made our way to Conference Room B, the same space where I had presented our Q3 campaign results just 3 days earlier. The room felt different now, charged with personal tension that had nothing to do with quarterly performance metrics or strategic planning initiatives. Marcus was already seated at the conference table when we arrived, his leather portfolio open and a tablet positioned for note-taking. He stood to greet us with the same professional courtesy he had displayed during our initial workplace introduction, shaking hands with Robert and offering me a polite nod of acknowledgement. "Thank you both for taking the time to meet with me," Marcus began as we settled around the table. "I'm working to understand each department's unique challenges and opportunities so I can better serve TechFlow's compliance and investigation needs. Sarah, Robert mentioned that you recently completed a very successful campaign launch. I'd love to hear about the processes that contributed to that success." The question was entirely appropriate and directly related to understanding our department's workflow, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus was cataloging information for purposes beyond workplace improvement. I launched into a detailed explanation of our Q3 campaign strategy, focusing on collaboration methods, timeline management, and performance measurement techniques. Throughout my presentation, Marcus asked thoughtful follow-up questions about team communication, project approval processes, and client interaction protocols. His questions demonstrated genuine understanding of marketing operations and showed impressive preparation for someone who had been at the company for less than a week. Robert contributed observations about our department's evolution over the past few years, highlighting improvements in cross-functional collaboration and client satisfaction metrics. The conversation flowed naturally, covering topics that any competent workplace consultant would need to understand about our operational structure. As the meeting progressed, I began to relax slightly, thinking that perhaps my concerns about Marcus's motivations had been overblown. His questions were professional, his demeanor was appropriately consultative, and he seemed genuinely interested in understanding how our department contributed to TechFlow's overall success. Then Marcus shifted the conversation in a direction that immediately raised my alertness level. "I'm particularly interested in understanding workplace relationships and communication patterns," he said, consulting his notes before continuing. "How do team members typically handle disagreements or conflicts? Are there established protocols for addressing concerns about colleagues or management decisions?" The questions were legitimate from a workplace investigation perspective, but I recognized Marcus's subtle intelligence-gathering technique. He was probing for information about potential vulnerabilities, interpersonal tensions, or areas of dissatisfaction that might become relevant during future investigations. Robert responded with general information about our open-door policy and regular team meetings, emphasizing the collaborative culture that had developed within our department. He mentioned our quarterly feedback sessions and the informal mentorship relationships that had evolved naturally among team members. Marcus took detailed notes throughout Robert's explanation, occasionally asking for clarification about specific communication channels or conflict resolution procedures. When Robert finished, Marcus turned his attention directly to me. "Sarah, as someone who's been here for 4 years, you've probably observed changes in workplace dynamics as the company has grown. Have you noticed any patterns in how employee concerns are typically addressed, or areas where you think our new compliance procedures might be most valuable?" The question felt like a test, designed to elicit information about potential complaints or dissatisfaction that he might later investigate. I chose my response carefully, focusing on positive aspects of TechFlow's culture while avoiding any statements that could be interpreted as criticism or areas of concern. "TechFlow has maintained remarkably consistent values even as we've expanded," I replied. "The emphasis on collaboration and professional development has created an environment where most issues are resolved through direct communication and team problem solving. I think the new compliance procedures will be most valuable, in maintaining these positive patterns as we continue to grow. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, making additional notes before closing his portfolio and concluding the meeting with thanks for our time and insights. The entire consultation had lasted exactly 1 hour, efficiently covering substantial ground while maintaining entirely professional boundaries. As we gathered our materials and prepared to leave the conference room, Marcus addressed me directly for the first time since our initial greeting. "Sarah, I noticed in reviewing departmental information that you've been involved in several cross-functional projects. Would you be available for a brief follow-up conversation next week to discuss those collaboration experiences in more detail?" The request sounded reasonable, but the fact that he was singling me out for additional consultation created immediate discomfort. Robert was present for the invitation, which meant I couldn't decline without appearing unprofessional or creating questions about my willingness to cooperate with company initiatives. "Of course," I replied, maintaining the same professional tone I had used throughout the meeting. "Should I coordinate with your schedule through the calendar system?" "I'll send you a meeting invitation," Marcus responded with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Looking forward to continuing our conversation." After Marcus left the conference room, Robert and I walked back toward our department in thoughtful silence. I could sense that he was processing the meeting and forming impressions about the new workplace dynamics that Marcus's presence would create. "That seemed to go well," Robert commented as we reached my desk. He asked good questions and seemed genuinely interested in understanding our processes. "Did anything strike you as unusual or concerning?" I considered how much to share about my instinctive discomfort with Marcus's follow-up meeting request and his particular interest in workplace relationships and conflict patterns. Robert had been supportive about my personal history disclosure, but I didn't want to appear paranoid about routine workplace interactions. "Nothing specific," I replied carefully. "He's certainly thorough in his approach to understanding departmental dynamics. I think the individual follow-up conversations will give him good insight into different perspectives on company culture." The following week brought a steady stream of Marcus sightings throughout the office as he continued his systematic consultation process. I heard colleagues discussing their meetings with varying degrees of enthusiasm, most expressing appreciation for his professional approach and genuine interest in employee experiences. Jessica reported that her consultation had focused heavily on creative processes and client collaboration methods, with particular attention to how design decisions were communicated and approved across different departments. She mentioned that Marcus had asked several questions about workplace stress and deadline pressure, topics that seemed designed to identify potential areas of employee dissatisfaction. David Park from our IT department mentioned that his meeting had covered technology infrastructure and security protocols, but had also included questions about employee access to company systems and data protection procedures. The combination of operational and compliance-focused topics suggested that Marcus was building comprehensive understanding of both TechFlow's business processes and potential risk areas. Amanda Foster seemed particularly impressed by her consultation experience, describing Marcus as an excellent listener who had shown genuine interest in junior employee perspectives and professional development opportunities. She mentioned that he had asked about mentorship relationships and career advancement processes, topics that were directly relevant to her own workplace experience. The pattern of positive feedback about Marcus's consultation approach created an interesting contradiction with my growing sense of unease about his presence at TechFlow. Objectively, he was performing his job well and earning respect from colleagues who appreciated his thoughtful questions and professional demeanor. My personal knowledge of his character and motivations created suspicion that wasn't shared by coworkers who only knew him as a competent new hire. The individual follow-up meeting Marcus had requested was scheduled for the following Thursday at 3 p.m. in his office, located on the 5th floor in the HR department area. I had never been to that part of the building, as my interactions with human resources had typically been limited to annual reviews and benefits enrollment meetings conducted in conference rooms or Linda Morrison's office. Marcus's office was larger than I had expected, with windows overlooking the downtown Austin skyline and modern furniture that suggested either generous budget allocation or personal investment in professional appearance. His desk was meticulously organized, with carefully arranged files and a dual-monitor computer setup that displayed what appeared to be employee database information. "Thank you for making time for this follow-up conversation," Marcus said as I settled into the chair across from his desk. "I wanted to discuss your cross-functional project experiences in more detail, particularly the collaboration methods that have been most effective in your role." For the next 20 minutes, we discussed specific projects I had worked on over the past 2 years, focusing on coordination challenges, communication strategies, and outcomes that had contributed to departmental success. Marcus asked detailed questions about timeline management, stakeholder engagement, and resource allocation methods that demonstrated impressive understanding of project management complexities. The conversation felt entirely professional and appropriately focused on workplace matters that were relevant to his consultation objectives. I began to think that perhaps my concerns about his motivations had been unfounded, that he was simply conducting thorough research to understand TechFlow's operational culture. Then Marcus leaned back in his chair and shifted the conversation in a direction that immediately triggered my internal warning systems. "I've been impressed by the positive feedback about your work from colleagues across different departments," he said, consulting notes from what appeared to be multiple employee consultations. "Several people mentioned your reliability and collaborative approach. It's clear that you've built strong professional relationships here." The comment seemed like genuine professional acknowledgement, but something in his tone suggested an underlying message that I couldn't immediately identify. I thanked him for the feedback and waited to see where the conversation would lead. "I'm curious about your perspective on workplace boundaries and professional relationship management," Marcus continued. "In your experience, how do employees typically navigate the balance between personal connections and professional responsibilities?" The question felt loaded with implications related to our own personal history, though it was phrased in general terms that could apply to any workplace situation. I chose to respond as if he were asking about general professional development, rather than probing for information about our specific relationship. TechFlow has always emphasized maintaining appropriate professional boundaries while fostering collaborative relationships, I replied. I think most employees understand the importance of separating personal and professional dynamics to ensure workplace effectiveness. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, making notes that seemed more extensive than my response warranted. That's a mature perspective. I imagine it can be challenging when personal and professional spheres overlap, particularly in smaller company environments where employees might encounter former colleagues or even personal acquaintances in new professional contexts. The statement was clearly directed at our situation, though phrased in terms that maintained plausible deniability about his specific meaning. I recognized this as the same subtle manipulation technique he had used throughout our relationship, making pointed comments that carried personal messages while maintaining surface-level reasonableness. "Well, I think most professionals are capable of maintaining appropriate boundaries regardless of prior relationships," I responded, keeping my tone neutral while making it clear that I understood his implied reference. Workplace effectiveness depends on focusing on professional responsibilities rather than personal history. Absolutely, Marcus agreed with a slight smile that suggested satisfaction with having established this particular topic of conversation. I appreciate your perspective on these matters. Professional maturity is essential for maintaining positive workplace culture. The meeting concluded with Marcus thanking me for my insights and mentioning that he might follow up with additional questions as his understanding of TechFlow's culture continued to develop. The conversation had lasted exactly 30 minutes and had maintained entirely appropriate professional boundaries, yet I left his office feeling unsettled and strategically maneuvered. Over the next several weeks, I began to notice subtle changes in my workplace environment that initially seemed unrelated to Marcus's presence, but gradually formed a pattern that was difficult to ignore. small incidents that individually appeared insignificant, but collectively suggested a systematic effort to undermine my professional standing and comfort within the company. The first incident occurred during a team meeting where I was presenting ideas for our Q4 marketing strategy. I had prepared extensively for the presentation, developing comprehensive research and creative concepts that built logically on our recent campaign success. The meeting was proceeding smoothly until Kevin Walsh from the sales department raised questions about data accuracy and methodology that seemed designed to cast doubt on my research rather than seek genuine clarification. Kevin had never previously questioned my work or shown particular interest in marketing research methods, making his sudden scrutiny unusual and somewhat confrontational. His questions were technically valid, but delivered in a tone that suggested skepticism about my professional competence rather than collaborative inquiry. Robert Kim intervened to support my responses and redirect the conversation toward productive strategic discussion. But the interaction left me feeling publicly questioned in a way that was unprecedented in my 4 years at TechFlow. After the meeting, several colleagues expressed surprise about Kevin's unusual approach, with Jessica commenting that it seemed totally out of character for him to challenge marketing presentations so aggressively. The second incident involved a client communication issue that emerged during our October campaign launch. A key client reported receiving conflicting information about project timelines and deliverable specifications, creating confusion that required immediate clarification and relationship repair. The miscommunication was eventually traced to an email thread where details had been incorrectly summarized, but the initial client complaint was directed specifically at my project management. What made this incident particularly troubling was that the email thread in question included accurate information that I had provided, but the client had apparently received a different version that contained the errors. When I requested copies of the emails the client had received to understand how the miscommunication had occurred, I was told that the messages were no longer available in the client's system. The situation was resolved through direct conversation with the client and clarification of project specifications, but it created a temporary perception that I had provided inaccurate information. Robert supported my handling of the situation and acknowledged that communication errors occasionally occurred in complex projects, but the incident required explanatory conversations with several stakeholders. The third incident was more subtle, but potentially more damaging to my professional reputation. During a company-wide meeting about Q4 objectives and performance metrics, Linda Morrison mentioned that the HR department was reviewing employee feedback and workplace satisfaction data to identify opportunities for improvement. In the context of discussing communication effectiveness, Linda made a general comment about ensuring that all employees felt comfortable raising concerns about workplace dynamics or professional interactions. The comment was followed by a statement about the importance of addressing issues promptly before they affected team performance or workplace culture. While Linda's remarks were framed as general policy information, they were delivered while looking in my direction and seemed to carry implications about my specific workplace behavior. Several colleagues noticed the apparent focus and asked afterward if everything was all right with my standing in the company. I assured them that I wasn't aware of any concerns about my performance or professional conduct. But the public nature of Linda's comments created a perception that I might be connected to workplace issues requiring HR attention. The implication was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who had been paying attention during the meeting. These 3 incidents, occurring within a span of 4 weeks, established a pattern that was difficult to dismiss as coincidental workplace challenges. Each situation involved my professional competence or workplace behavior being questioned in public settings, creating cumulative damage to my reputation despite my strong performance record and positive relationships with colleagues. The pattern became more concerning when I realized that each incident had occurred shortly after Marcus had conducted consultation meetings with the individuals involved. Kevin Walsh had met with Marcus 2 days before the team meeting where he questioned my research methodology. The client communication issue emerged 3 days after Marcus had interviewed our customer service coordinator about client relationship management practices. Linda Morrison's comments at the company meeting followed within a week of what Linda had described as a comprehensive review of workplace satisfaction data with Marcus's assistance. The timing could have been coincidental, but my knowledge of Marcus's character and his demonstrated ability to manipulate workplace dynamics through careful information management made me increasingly suspicious that these incidents were being orchestrated rather than occurring naturally. The most troubling aspect of this emerging pattern was its subtlety and plausible deniability. Each incident was individually explainable as normal workplace challenges or communication issues. Kevin's questions could be attributed to due diligence and sales department interest in marketing data. The client miscommunication could be blamed on routine project complexity and coordination challenges. Linda's comments could be interpreted as general policy communication rather than specific reference to individual employees. However, the cumulative effect was to create a perception that my professional performance and workplace behavior warranted increased scrutiny and potential concern. Colleagues who had previously viewed me as a reliable team member began asking questions about whether I was experiencing problems or facing management concerns. Jessica was the first to directly address what she had observed over the past month. During our usual coffee break conversation, she mentioned that she had noticed an unusual number of workplace incidents involving me recently and wondered if there was something more serious happening. "Sarah, I don't want to be paranoid, but it seems like you've been dealing with more professional challenges lately than usual," she said, keeping her voice low to ensure privacy. "First that weird thing with Kevin questioning your research, then the client communication problem, and now Linda making those comments about workplace issues. Is everything okay with your standing here?" I appreciated Jessica's direct approach and her willingness to address observations that others might have noticed but avoided mentioning. Her question gave me an opportunity to share my growing concerns about the pattern I had been tracking and my suspicions about Marcus's potential involvement. "I've noticed the same pattern," I replied carefully. "What makes it particularly concerning is the timing. Each of these incidents has occurred shortly after Marcus conducted consultation meetings with the people involved. It could be coincidental, but given our personal history, I'm starting to wonder if there's a more systematic effort to undermine my professional standing." Jessica's expression grew serious as she processed this information and considered its implications for both my career and the workplace environment we had both valued at TechFlow. Her loyalty as a friend was clear, but I could also see her struggling with the difficulty of distinguishing between legitimate workplace concerns and potential personal vendetta disguised as professional consultation. "That's a really serious accusation," she said finally. "If Marcus is using his position to target you personally, that's not just unprofessional, it's potentially illegal workplace harassment. But proving it would be incredibly difficult, especially since everything you've described could have innocent explanations." The challenge Jessica had identified was precisely what made Marcus's approach so effective and dangerous. By creating incidents that were individually explainable as routine workplace issues, he could systematically damage my professional reputation while maintaining complete plausible deniability about his motivations or involvement. Even if I reported my suspicions to senior management, the evidence would be entirely circumstantial and could easily be dismissed as paranoid interpretation of normal workplace challenges. Meanwhile, the damage to my professional standing would continue accumulating through carefully orchestrated incidents designed to create perception of performance problems or workplace behavior concerns. The conversation with Jessica crystallized my understanding that I was facing a sophisticated campaign of professional sabotage that would be extremely difficult to prove or address through conventional workplace complaint channels. Marcus had positioned himself perfectly to conduct this campaign from within the HR infrastructure, specifically designed to address workplace concerns and employee complaints. As I returned to my desk that afternoon, I began to realize that the comfortable professional environment I had worked so hard to build at TechFlow was being systematically dismantled by someone who understood exactly how to exploit workplace systems and social dynamics to achieve personal objectives. The question was whether I could find a way to protect myself and document his activities before the damage to my career became irreversible. The first anonymous complaint arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, just as the Austin weather was shifting from the lingering heat of summer into the crisp clarity that made fall the city's most pleasant season. I discovered its existence not through any official notification, but through the concerned expression on Amanda Foster's face as she approached my desk with an unusual hesitancy that immediately caught my attention. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Kind of awkward," Amanda began, glancing around to ensure our conversation wouldn't be overheard by nearby colleagues. "Did you know that someone filed a complaint about your mentoring style? Marcus Thompson called me yesterday to ask questions about our working relationship and whether I ever felt pressured or uncomfortable during our project collaborations." The words hit me like a physical blow, creating an immediate sense of disbelief followed quickly by a cold understanding of how strategically this attack had been designed. Amanda was one of my closest mentoring relationships at TechFlow, a junior associate whose professional development I had invested significant time and energy in supporting. Our collaboration had always been positive and mutually beneficial, with Amanda frequently expressing gratitude for the guidance and opportunities I had provided. "What kind of questions did he ask?" I managed to respond, keeping my voice steady, despite the anger and concern building in my chest. Amanda shifted, uncomfortably, clearly troubled by the conversation she had been drawn into. He said there was an anonymous complaint suggesting that senior marketing employees might be creating uncomfortable working conditions for junior staff through excessive demands or inappropriate professional boundaries. He wanted to know if I had ever felt pressured to work longer hours than required, or if I had been asked to handle responsibilities beyond my job description. The sophistication of the attack was immediately apparent. By framing the complaint in terms of protecting junior employees from potential abuse of authority, Marcus had created a scenario where any defense I offered would appear to be dismissing legitimate workplace protection concerns. The anonymous nature of the complaint made it impossible to address directly or identify the specific behaviors that were supposedly problematic. "Amanda, have you ever felt pressured or uncomfortable in our working relationship?" I asked directly, needing to understand her perspective on the situation we were both now entangled in. "Not at all," Amanda replied immediately, her tone carrying genuine confusion about the complaint's allegations. "You've been incredibly supportive and patient with my learning process. Every project we've worked on together has helped me develop new skills and understanding." I told Marcus that, but he kept asking follow-up questions like he was looking for something specific that I wasn't providing. The revelation that Marcus had continued pressing for negative information even after Amanda's initial positive response confirmed my suspicion that this investigation was designed to produce predetermined conclusions rather than objectively assess workplace concerns. A legitimate investigation would have accepted Amanda's account and moved on to other areas of inquiry. "Did he ask you to document specific incidents or provide written statements about our interactions?" I inquired, trying to understand the full scope of information Marcus was collecting. He asked me to think carefully about whether there had been any situations where I might have felt obligated to agree to requests or projects because of power dynamics or fear of negative consequences, Amanda explained. When I said no, he suggested that sometimes junior employees don't recognize inappropriate pressure until they have more experience and perspective. The manipulative nature of Marcus's questioning technique was exactly what I would have expected based on my knowledge of his character. By suggesting that Amanda might not recognize problematic behavior when it occurred, he was attempting to plant seeds of doubt about her own perceptions and experiences. The approach was designed to undermine confidence in her positive assessment of our working relationship. "I want you to know that you should never feel pressured to characterize our working relationship in any particular way," I told Amanda firmly. Your honest perspective is what matters, regardless of what anyone else might be suggesting or looking for. Amanda nodded, but I could see that the investigation had created uncertainty and discomfort that hadn't previously existed in our professional relationship. The very fact that our mentoring dynamic was being scrutinized and questioned by HR had introduced an element of self-consciousness and potential legal concern that would inevitably change how we interacted going forward. Over the next week, I learned through conversations with colleagues that similar anonymous complaints had been filed regarding other aspects of my workplace behavior. Kevin Walsh mentioned that he had been contacted about my collaborative approach during cross-departmental projects, with specific questions about whether I had ever been dismissive of input from non-marketing team members or resistant to feedback about campaign strategies. David Park from IT reported that Marcus had asked him about my technology usage and data security practices, apparently in response to a complaint suggesting that I might be accessing company systems or files beyond the scope of my authorized responsibilities. The implication was particularly troubling because it suggested potential misconduct that could have serious professional and legal consequences. Even Jessica had been contacted about my workplace demeanor and interpersonal relationships, with questions focusing on whether I had ever made colleagues feel excluded from professional opportunities or created cliques within the marketing department. The complaint apparently suggested that I used personal friendships to influence workplace decisions and resource allocation. The pattern of anonymous complaints covered virtually every aspect of my professional behavior, from project management and collaboration style to technology usage and interpersonal relationships. Each complaint was carefully constructed to raise concerns about different categories of potential workplace misconduct, creating a comprehensive attack on my professional character and competence. What made the situation particularly insidious was that the complaints were apparently sourced from multiple anonymous individuals, making it appear as though widespread concern existed about my workplace behavior. However, the colleagues who were being interviewed as part of the investigations consistently reported that they had no knowledge of the alleged problems and had never witnessed the behaviors described in the complaints. Robert Kim requested a private meeting with me on Friday afternoon, his expression carrying the serious concern of a manager who had been briefed about HR investigations involving one of his team members. We met in his office with the door closed, and he began the conversation with the careful tone of someone navigating potentially sensitive employment issues. Sarah, I need to discuss some workplace concerns that have been brought to HR's attention, Robert began, consulting notes that had obviously been provided by Marcus or Linda Morrison. I want you to know that I don't personally believe these allegations reflect your actual workplace behavior, but I'm required to address them formally as part of the investigation process. The fact that Robert felt compelled to preface our conversation with a disclaimer about his personal assessment of the situation spoke volumes about the seriousness of the complaints and their potential impact on my employment status. I braced myself for the details while trying to maintain professional composure. There have been several anonymous complaints suggesting concerns about your professional conduct in various areas, Robert continued. The allegations include inappropriate pressure on junior employees, resistance to collaborative feedback, potential misuse of company technology resources, and creation of exclusionary workplace dynamics. Hearing the complaints summarized in Robert's professional language made their strategic construction even more apparent. Each allegation targeted a different aspect of workplace behavior that employers were legally required to investigate and address. The combination created an impression of widespread misconduct that would be difficult to defend against without appearing defensive or dismissive of legitimate workplace protection concerns. Robert, I need you to know that I believe these complaints are being filed maliciously by someone who wants to damage my professional standing, I said, deciding that the situation had progressed beyond the point where diplomatic silence was protective. The timing and content of these allegations suggest a coordinated effort to create problems where none previously existed. Robert's expression indicated that he had considered this possibility. but also that he was constrained by company policy and legal requirements about how employee complaints must be handled, regardless of their suspected motivations. I understand your perspective, and frankly, the pattern does seem unusual, Robert acknowledged. However, HR is required to investigate all workplace complaints thoroughly and objectively. The process will involve interviews with relevant colleagues, review of your work performance and technology usage, and documentation of any findings or recommendations. The investigation process Robert described would be conducted entirely under Marcus's supervision and authority, meaning that the person I suspected of orchestrating the complaints would be responsible for determining their validity and consequences. The conflict of interest was obvious, but addressing it would require me to make explicit accusations about Marcus's motivations that I couldn't definitively prove. Who will be conducting the investigation? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Marcus Thompson, as our workplace investigation officer, will be leading the review process, Robert confirmed. He'll be working with Linda Morrison to ensure that all company policies and legal requirements are followed appropriately. The confirmation that Marcus would be investigating complaints that I believed he had orchestrated created a sense of helplessness and systemic injustice that was difficult to process. Every aspect of the situation had been designed to place me in an impossible position where defending myself would appear unprofessional, while remaining silent would allow the allegations to stand unchallenged. Robert, I need to share something with you that might be relevant to this situation, I said, recognizing that I could no longer avoid disclosing the personal history that made Marcus's role in this investigation problematic. Marcus Thompson is my ex-fiancé. Our relationship ended badly 8 months ago, and I believe his presence at TechFlow and his handling of these complaints may be motivated by personal animosity rather than professional responsibility. Robert's reaction confirmed that this information was news to him and significantly changed his understanding of the investigation's dynamics. His expression shifted from managerial concern to serious alarm as he considered the implications of having an employee investigated by someone with clear personal motivation for bias. Sarah, this is a serious conflict of interest that needs to be addressed immediately, Robert said, reaching for his phone. I need to contact Linda Morrison right away to discuss how this situation should be handled. You should not be subjected to investigation by someone with personal reasons to be biased against you. The relief I felt at Robert's immediate recognition of the problem was tempered by uncertainty about whether Linda Morrison would be equally concerned about the conflict of interest, or whether she would prioritize the investigation process over employee protection concerns. Robert's phone call with Linda Morrison lasted nearly 20 minutes and was conducted in hushed tones that made it impossible for me to hear the details of their conversation. When he concluded the call, his expression was troubled in a way that suggested the discussion hadn't produced the clear resolution he had hoped for. Linda is concerned about the conflict of interest, but she's also concerned about the integrity of the investigation process, Robert explained. She needs to consult with legal counsel about how to proceed when the investigator has a personal relationship with the subject of the complaints. This situation apparently hasn't occurred before at TechFlow. The fact that my disclosure had created complications for the investigation process, rather than immediately resolving them, suggested that the systemic problems I was facing were more complex than simple bias or personal vendetta. The company's HR infrastructure wasn't equipped to handle situations where the investigation system itself might be compromised by personal conflicts. Over the weekend, I spent considerable time researching employee rights and workplace investigation procedures, trying to understand what options might be available for addressing conflicts of interest in HR processes. The legal information I found was complex and often contradictory, but several sources suggested that employees had the right to request alternative investigation procedures when conflicts of interest existed. Monday morning brought an email from Linda Morrison requesting a meeting to discuss the investigation process and address concerns about potential conflicts of interest. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon and would include Robert Kim as my supervisor and advocate. The email's formal tone and careful language suggested that Linda was taking the conflict of interest seriously, but was also proceeding cautiously to avoid legal complications. The meeting took place in Linda Morrison's office, a spacious room, decorated with motivational posters about workplace excellence and framed certificates, recognizing TechFlow's various employment awards and recognitions. Linda began the discussion by acknowledging the unusual nature of the situation and expressing commitment to ensuring fair and objective investigation procedures. "Sarah, Robert has informed me about your personal history with Marcus Thompson, and I want to assure you that TechFlow takes conflicts of interest very seriously," Linda began. "However, we also have legal obligations to investigate workplace complaints thoroughly and objectively, regardless of the personal relationships that might complicate the process." The careful balance Linda was attempting to maintain between employee protection and legal compliance was evident in her phrasing, but her emphasis on legal obligations suggested that the investigation would proceed despite the obvious conflict of interest. "I've consulted with our legal counsel about how to handle this situation," Linda continued. "Their recommendation is that the investigation should continue under Marcus's supervision, but with additional oversight and documentation to ensure objectivity and fair treatment. You'll have the right to have a representative present during any interviews and to review all findings and recommendations before they become final." The proposed solution felt inadequate given the scope of the problem, but I recognize that challenging it further would require me to make more explicit accusations about Marcus's motivations that could themselves become legal issues if I couldn't provide definitive proof. "Linda, I appreciate the additional safeguards, but I'm concerned that allowing Marcus to continue investigating complaints that I believe he may have orchestrated creates an inherent bias that can't be overcome through oversight procedures," I said, choosing to be direct about my concerns despite the professional risks involved. "Are you alleging that Marcus Thompson has filed false complaints against you?" Linda asked, her tone becoming more formal as the conversation moved into territory that could have legal implications for both employees and the company. The question forced me to either make explicit accusations that I couldn't prove or back down from the challenge I had raised. I understood that this moment would determine whether I would pursue the conflict of interest aggressively or accept the investigation process as Linda had proposed. "I'm saying that the timing and content of these complaints, combined with Marcus's personal knowledge of my workplace activities and relationships, creates a situation where bias is inevitable, whether intentional or not," I replied, trying to frame the concern in terms of systemic problems rather than personal accusations. Linda nodded thoughtfully, apparently accepting this framing as more legally manageable than direct allegations of misconduct by Marcus. "I understand your concerns, and I want to ensure that you feel the investigation process is fair and thorough. Let's proceed with the additional safeguards I mentioned, and you can raise any specific concerns about bias or inappropriate procedures as they arise." The meeting concluded with scheduling for my formal interview as part of the investigation process, to be conducted the following week with Robert present as my representative and Linda observing to ensure appropriate procedures. The interview would address each of the anonymous complaints individually and give me opportunity to respond to the specific allegations that had been made. As I left Linda's office, I felt a mixture of relief that the conflict of interest had been acknowledged and frustration that it hadn't been resolved in a way that addressed the fundamental problem of Marcus's involvement in the investigation. The additional safeguards Linda had promised were better than nothing, but they didn't eliminate the basic injustice of being investigated by someone with personal motivations for finding problems with my performance. The formal interview was scheduled for the following Thursday at 2 p.m. in Conference Room C, the largest meeting space on the executive floor. The location choice seemed designed to emphasize the seriousness of the proceedings and create an atmosphere of official investigation rather than routine employee discussion. I spent the intervening days preparing responses to the various allegations, gathering documentation of my work performance and positive feedback from colleagues, and consulting with an employment attorney to understand my rights and options throughout the investigation process. The attorney confirmed that the conflict of interest was problematic, but advised that challenging the investigation procedures aggressively could create additional employment risks if not handled carefully. Thursday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp November weather that usually made me appreciate living in Austin, but the beauty of the day was overshadowed by the anxiety and anger I felt about the investigation that was designed to damage my professional reputation. I arrived at conference room C 15 minutes early, carrying a folder of documentation and trying to project the professional confidence that had served me well throughout my career at TechFlow. Marcus was already present when I entered the room, seated at the head of the conference table with his leather portfolio open and a recording device positioned for what was apparently going to be a formal, documented interview process. His expression was entirely professional, showing no acknowledgement of our personal history or the conflict of interest that everyone else recognized as problematic. Linda Morrison and Robert Kim arrived together, taking seats that created a configuration where I was positioned across from Marcus with my advocates to either side. The arrangement felt like a formal hearing rather than an employee discussion, reinforcing my sense that this process was designed to create an official record of misconduct rather than objectively assess workplace concerns. "Sarah, thank you for participating in this interview," Marcus began, consulting notes that detailed the allegations I would be addressing. "We're here to discuss several anonymous complaints that have been filed regarding your workplace behavior and professional conduct. I want to emphasize that this is a fact-finding process designed to ensure a safe and productive work environment for all TechFlow employees." The irony of Marcus expressing concern for employee safety and workplace protection while conducting what I believed to be a personally motivated campaign of harassment was almost overwhelming, but I maintained professional composure and prepared to respond to whatever allegations he would present. "The first complaint concerns your mentoring relationship with junior employees, specifically Amanda Foster," Marcus continued. "The allegation suggests that you have created inappropriate pressure for extended work hours and responsibilities beyond normal job requirements. How do you respond to this concern?" I had prepared extensively for this question and responded with specific examples of how my mentoring relationship with Amanda had been structured to support her professional development while respecting appropriate boundaries and company policies. I provided documentation of Amanda's positive feedback about our collaboration and emphasized her voluntary participation in all projects and learning opportunities. Marcus listened to my response while taking detailed notes, occasionally asking follow-up questions that seemed designed to identify potential inconsistencies or areas where my account might be challenged. His questioning technique was thorough and professionally appropriate, but I could sense the underlying search for problems that would support the complaint's allegations. The interview continued for nearly 2 hours, covering each anonymous complaint in detail and requiring me to provide specific responses to allegations about collaborative behavior, technology usage, workplace relationships, and professional conduct. Throughout the process, Marcus maintained complete professional detachment, showing no signs of the personal animosity that I believed motivated the entire investigation. Linda Morrison and Robert Kim observed the proceedings carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting additional documentation to support my responses. Their presence provided some comfort that the process was being monitored for appropriate procedures, but didn't change the fundamental problem of being investigated by someone with personal reasons to find fault with my behavior. As the interview concluded, Marcus summarized the next steps in the investigation process, which would include additional interviews with colleagues mentioned in my responses and review of relevant documentation and technology usage records. He estimated that the investigation would be completed within 2 weeks, with written findings and any recommended actions provided to Linda Morrison and Robert Kim. "Thank you for your cooperation with this process, Sarah," Marcus said as we gathered our materials. "I want to assure you that this investigation will be conducted objectively and fairly, based solely on the evidence and testimony we collect. The statement felt like a calculated insult, given the obvious conflict of interest and the personal history that made objective investigation impossible. But I simply nodded acknowledgement and left the conference room with Robert, both of us, recognizing that the real battle for my professional reputation was just beginning. The investigation's preliminary findings arrived in my email inbox on a gray December morning, delivered with the clinical efficiency that characterized all of Marcus's professional communications. The subject line read, "Workplace Investigation, Preliminary Assessment," and the attachment contained a 12-page document that systematically dismantled 4 years of professional reputation building, with the precision of a legal brief designed to justify predetermined conclusions. I opened the document in the privacy of my apartment before work, knowing that reading it at the office would risk colleagues witnessing my emotional reaction to what I expected would be a professionally devastating assessment. The executive summary appeared on page 2, written in the neutral language of HR documentation, but containing conclusions that would effectively end my career at TechFlow if accepted without challenge. Based on comprehensive review of employee testimony, documentation analysis, and behavioral pattern assessment, this investigation has identified multiple areas of concern regarding the subject employee's workplace conduct and professional practices. The summary began. While individual incidents may appear minor in isolation, the cumulative pattern suggests systematic issues with collaborative behavior, boundary management, and adherence to company policies that warrant formal corrective action. The language was carefully constructed to acknowledge that each specific allegation was relatively minor, while building a case for serious misconduct based on the supposed pattern of behavior. Marcus had skillfully avoided making dramatic accusations that could be easily disproven, while creating an overall narrative that portrayed me as a problematic employee whose behavior had negatively affected multiple colleagues and workplace dynamics. The detailed findings section addressed each anonymous complaint with apparent thoroughness, presenting testimony from colleagues that had been selectively edited and interpreted to support negative conclusions about my professional conduct. Amanda Foster's positive comments about our mentoring relationship were acknowledged, but dismissed as potentially influenced by power dynamics and junior employee reluctance to criticize senior colleagues. Her statement that she had never felt pressured or uncomfortable was reframed as evidence that I had been skilled at maintaining inappropriate professional relationships without creating obvious awareness of the problems. Kevin Walsh's interview testimony about our project collaborations was presented as confirming concerns about my resistance to feedback and collaborative input, despite Kevin's actual statements during our team meetings that had been supportive and professional. The investigation report quoted fragments of his responses that could be interpreted as criticism, while omitting context that would have clarified his overall positive assessment of our working relationship. Even David Park's comments about my technology usage had been twisted into suggestions that I might be accessing company systems beyond my authorized scope, despite his actual testimony that my technical practices were entirely appropriate and consistent with company policies. The report implied that his defense of my behavior might be influenced by personal friendship rather than objective professional assessment. The most damaging section addressed my interpersonal relationships and workplace dynamics, suggesting that I had created an exclusionary environment within the marketing department that favored employees who maintained personal friendships with me while potentially marginalizing those who didn't engage in social interactions beyond required professional activities. Jessica's loyalty and our close friendship were reframed as evidence of favoritism that compromised workplace equity and professional objectivity. The investigation's recommendations occupied the final 2 pages and included formal reprimand for workplace behavior concerns, mandatory training on professional boundaries and collaborative leadership, reassignment of mentoring responsibilities, to eliminate potential power dynamic issues, and quarterly performance monitoring to ensure compliance with corrective action requirements. The recommendations effectively stripped away most of the professional responsibilities and relationships that had made my job meaningful while creating a probationary status that would make future advancement virtually impossible. Reading through, the document felt like watching my professional identity being systematically destroyed through careful manipulation of facts and testimony that had been recontextualized to support conclusions that bore no resemblance to my actual workplace, behavior, or relationships. The sophistication of Marcus's approach was evident in every paragraph, demonstrating his understanding of how to construct legally defensible arguments for misconduct using selective interpretation of employee feedback and behavioral assessment. The most insidious aspect of the report was its veneer of professional objectivity and thorough investigation methodology. Any senior manager reviewing the document would see evidence of comprehensive fact-finding and careful analysis of multiple employee perspectives. The conflict of interest concerns I had raised were addressed in a brief footnote acknowledging that appropriate oversight and documentation procedures were implemented to ensure investigation integrity, despite personal relationship history between investigator and subject. I called in sick that morning, unable to face the prospect of normal workplace interactions while processing the implications of findings that would likely be accepted by Linda Morrison and implemented regardless of my objections or appeals. The evidence Marcus had assembled was too comprehensive and professionally presented to be easily challenged, especially since questioning the investigation's conclusions would require me to essentially accuse multiple colleagues of lying or being manipulated in their testimony. By afternoon, I had reached the decision that would define the next phase of my professional life. I could not continue working at TechFlow under the conditions Marcus had engineered, accepting a diminished role and damaged reputation while remaining subject to his ongoing oversight and potential future investigations. The systematic nature of his campaign against me would not end with this initial success, and staying would only provide him with additional opportunities to create problems and gather evidence for more serious disciplinary actions. The resignation letter I drafted was brief and professional, citing the need to pursue new opportunities rather than explaining the real reasons for my departure. Making explicit accusations about Marcus's conduct would likely result in legal complications and professional reference problems that would extend the damage to future employment opportunities. Sometimes the only way to win was to refuse to continue playing a game where the rules had been designed to ensure your defeat. Robert Kim received my resignation with evident dismay and genuine concern about losing a valuable team member whose departure would significantly impact our department's capabilities and client relationships. His response confirmed that he viewed the investigation's findings as inconsistent with his direct experience of my professional performance and workplace behavior. "Sarah, I hope you'll reconsider this decision," Robert said during our private meeting in his office. "I know the investigation process has been difficult, but I believe we can work through the recommended corrective actions and restore your standing within the company. Your contributions to this department have been too valuable to lose over what appears to be a complicated personal situation." I appreciated Robert's support and his recognition that the investigation had been influenced by factors beyond legitimate workplace concerns, but I also understood that he was constrained by company policy and HR recommendations that he couldn't simply ignore or override without creating legal risks for both himself and TechFlow. "Robert, I appreciate everything you've done to support me through this process," I replied. "But I can't continue working in an environment where my professional reputation and relationships have been systematically undermined. The investigation's findings will affect how colleagues and clients perceive my competence and integrity, regardless of whether the conclusions are accurate." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Robert exploring various options for addressing my concerns while maintaining compliance with HR requirements and legal obligations. His suggestions included requesting external review of the investigation findings, appealing the recommended corrective actions through company grievance procedures, and potentially restructuring my role to minimize interactions with colleagues who had been involved in the investigation testimony. While I recognized Robert's genuine desire to find a solution that would allow me to remain with TechFlow, each option he proposed would require me to continue working under Marcus's oversight and potential future investigation. The fundamental problem of having someone with personal motivations for professional retaliation in a position of HR authority couldn't be resolved through procedural adjustments or role modifications. I understand your reasoning, but I hope you'll keep the door open for returning if circumstances change, Robert concluded. Your professional capabilities and character haven't changed because of this investigation, regardless of what the formal findings suggest. Linda Morrison's response to my resignation was more complicated, reflecting her position as someone responsible for defending the investigation process while potentially recognizing its problematic aspects. She requested a final meeting to discuss the circumstances of my departure and ensure that company procedures were followed appropriately for employee transitions. Sarah, while I respect your decision to pursue other opportunities, I want to address any concerns you might have about the investigation process or findings, Linda began during our meeting in her office. If there are specific procedural issues or factual errors that you believe affected the investigation's conclusions, we have appeals processes available to address those concerns. The offer to appeal the investigation findings was technically appropriate but practically meaningless, given that any appeal would likely be reviewed by the same HR infrastructure that had approved Marcus's hiring and investigation methodology. Challenging the findings would require me to prove that multiple colleagues had been manipulated or that Marcus had deliberately constructed false evidence, accusations that would be nearly impossible to substantiate and would create additional legal risks. Linda, my concerns about this investigation go beyond specific procedural issues, I replied carefully. The fundamental conflict of interest created by having my ex-fiancé conduct an investigation into complaints about my workplace behavior created a situation where objective assessment was impossible, regardless of the oversight procedures that were implemented. Linda's expression indicated understanding of my perspective, while also revealing the institutional constraints that had prevented her from addressing the conflict of interest more definitively. Her response confirmed that the decision to allow Marcus to continue the investigation had been influenced by legal counsel and company policy considerations that prioritized investigation completion over employee protection concerns. I understand your frustration with that aspect of the process, Linda acknowledged. However, our legal counsel advised that stopping the investigation due to personal relationship history could create liability issues if the workplace complaints contained legitimate safety or policy concerns. The additional oversight we implemented was designed to ensure fair treatment while meeting our legal obligations. The explanation revealed the impossible position TechFlow had been placed in by Marcus's strategic timing and positioning. By establishing himself as the company's investigation officer before revealing his personal connection to me, he had created a situation where removing him from my case would appear to prioritize personal relationships over employee protection. The company's legal vulnerabilities had been weaponized against me through Marcus's understanding of how HR systems and employment law intersected. My last week at TechFlow passed with the strange mixture of normal workplace routines and underlying awareness that these familiar interactions were ending. Colleagues who had learned about my resignation expressed surprise and concern, with several asking whether the decision was related to the recent HR investigation that had been conducted. With unusual visibility and formality, Jessica was particularly affected by my departure. Recognizing that my resignation would leave her as one of the few people at TechFlow who understood the full scope of what had transpired over the past several months. Her friendship had been a crucial source of support throughout the investigation process, and losing that daily connection would eliminate one of the few positive aspects of my TechFlow experience. I can't believe he's actually succeeded in driving you out, Jessica said during one of our final coffee conversations. Everything you built here, all the relationships and professional reputation you developed, destroyed by someone who couldn't handle the fact that you ended your relationship with him. The summary was accurate, but didn't capture the sophisticated methodology Marcus had used to achieve his objectives. Rather than engaging in obvious harassment or unprofessional behavior, he had weaponized the company's own employee protection systems against me, creating legitimate-appearing investigations and documentation that would be difficult to challenge or expose as personally motivated. The most frustrating part is that he'll probably continue working here successfully, viewed as a competent investigation officer who handled a difficult workplace situation professionally, I replied. No one except us will understand that the entire crisis was manufactured by the person who was supposed to be resolving it objectively. Amanda Foster's reaction to my resignation was particularly painful, as she clearly felt responsible for the investigation that had contributed to my departure. Her guilt about answering Marcus's questions honestly, even though her responses had been supportive of me, reflected her understanding that she had been manipulated into participating in a process designed to damage my professional standing. "Sarah, I'm so sorry this happened," Amanda said during our final mentoring conversation. "I never imagined that telling the truth about our working relationship could somehow be used against you. If I had understood what was really happening, I would have been more careful about how I responded to the investigation questions." I assured Amanda that she had handled the situation appropriately and that the problem lay with the investigation methodology rather than her honest participation in the process. However, I could see that the experience had taught her valuable lessons about workplace politics and the importance of understanding the motivations behind seemingly routine HR inquiries. The exit interview with Human Resources was conducted by Linda Morrison rather than Marcus, apparently in recognition that having him oversee my departure would be inappropriately provocative given the circumstances. Linda's questions focused on standard topics about company culture, management effectiveness, and suggestions for improvement, carefully avoiding specific discussion of the investigation that had precipitated my resignation. "Is there anything TechFlow could have done differently to address your concerns and encourage you to remain with the company?" Linda asked near the conclusion of our conversation. The question invited me to provide feedback that might be useful for preventing similar situations in the future, but answering honestly would require me to make explicit accusations about Marcus's conduct that could create legal complications for both myself and the company. I chose to frame my response in terms of general policy recommendations rather than specific personal grievances. I think companies need better procedures for handling conflicts of interest in HR investigations, particularly when personal relationships exist between investigators and employees, I replied. The current approach of adding oversight rather than removing conflicted personnel doesn't adequately address the fundamental problems with bias and objectivity. Linda nodded thoughtfully, apparently recognizing the validity of my suggestion, while also understanding that implementing such changes would require significant policy development and legal review. My recommendation would likely be noted in company files, but was unlikely to result in immediate procedural changes that would prevent similar situations from occurring. My final day at TechFlow concluded with a small gathering of colleagues who wanted to express appreciation for my contributions to the marketing department and maintain connections for potential future collaboration. The informal farewell felt bittersweet, representing the end of professional relationships that had been meaningful and productive before being overshadowed by the investigation and resignation process. Robert Kim's final comments during the gathering captured the sentiments that several colleagues had expressed privately about my departure and the circumstances that had led to it. Sarah has been an invaluable member of our team whose professionalism and expertise have contributed significantly to our department's success. While we respect her decision to pursue new opportunities, we'll miss her collaborative approach and creative insights. The carefully worded tribute acknowledged my contributions while avoiding any reference to the investigation or controversial circumstances of my departure. Robert's diplomatic language protected both himself and the company from potential legal complications while still expressing genuine appreciation for my professional work. 3 weeks after leaving TechFlow, I received a phone call from Alex Rivera, a business development manager who had started working at the company just a few weeks before my resignation. We had met briefly during new employee introductions, but hadn't had opportunities for substantial interaction before my departure. His call was unexpected, but immediately intriguing. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me reaching out," Alex began. "I got your contact information from Jessica Rodriguez, who mentioned that you might be interested in hearing about some observations I made during my brief time at TechFlow. I think there might be some information you'd find relevant to your experience there." The mysterious nature of Alex's request sparked both curiosity and caution, as I wasn't sure what kind of information he might have encountered or why he would feel compelled to share it with me. However, his tone suggested genuine concern rather than casual gossip, and Jessica's referral indicated that she trusted his motivations for reaching out. We arranged to meet for coffee at Luna Cafe, the small restaurant across from TechFlow that had become my preferred location for conversations that required privacy from potential workplace observation. Alex arrived precisely on time, carrying himself with the professional confidence of someone accustomed to business development responsibilities, but also displaying an unusual level of caution that suggested the information he wanted to share was sensitive. "Before I begin, I want you to know that I'm sharing this information because I believe you deserve to understand what really happened during your time at TechFlow," Alex said after we had settled at a corner table away from other customers. "What I observed suggests that the investigation and problems you experienced weren't random workplace issues." The confirmation that Alex had witnessed evidence supporting my suspicions about Marcus's behavior created immediate validation of concerns that I had begun to question during the weeks since my resignation. Self-doubt about whether I had correctly interpreted the situation or overreacted to normal workplace challenges had been constant companions since leaving TechFlow. "I started at TechFlow about 3 weeks before you resigned," Alex continued. "During my onboarding process, I had several meetings with Marcus Thompson to understand company policies and compliance procedures. His approach to discussing employee relationships and workplace dynamics struck me as unusually focused on identifying potential problems rather than understanding positive aspects of company culture." Alex's description of Marcus's information gathering techniques confirmed my assessment of his systematic approach to workplace manipulation. Rather than conducting routine new employee orientation, Marcus had apparently been using onboarding meetings to collect intelligence about employee relationships and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited during future investigations. During one of our meetings, Marcus specifically asked about my observations of marketing department dynamics and whether I had noticed any concerning behavior patterns among team members, Alex explained. When I mentioned that everyone seemed professional and collaborative, he suggested that senior employees sometimes created problems that weren't immediately obvious to new colleagues. The revelation that Marcus had been actively soliciting negative observations about the marketing department from new employees demonstrated the premeditated nature of his campaign against me. Rather than waiting for legitimate complaints to emerge naturally, he had been attempting to manufacture concerns through leading questions and suggestive comments to recently hired staff. "The conversation that really concerned me occurred during my second week," Alex continued. Marcus asked specifically about Sarah Chen and whether I had observed any interactions between her and other employees that seemed inappropriate or problematic. When I said I hadn't worked with you directly, he provided detailed examples of behaviors I should watch for. The fact that Marcus had been actively attempting to recruit Alex as an observer and potential complainant about my behavior revealed the sophisticated planning behind the anonymous complaints that had eventually been filed. Rather than responding to organic workplace concerns, Marcus had been systematically trying to create problems where none existed through strategic information gathering and employee manipulation. "What kind of behaviors was he asking you to watch for?" I asked, curious about the specific targeting strategies Marcus had been employing. He described a pattern of senior employees creating pressure on junior colleagues through excessive mentoring demands, using personal relationships to influence professional decisions, and potentially accessing company information beyond authorized scope, Alex explained. The descriptions were detailed enough that it was clear he was talking about a specific individual rather than providing general guidance about workplace behavior. The behavioral descriptions Alex recounted matched perfectly with the complaints that had eventually been filed against me, confirming that Marcus had been developing his investigation strategy weeks before any anonymous allegations were submitted. The sophistication of his approach included recruiting potential witnesses and complainants through targeted questioning and suggestive guidance about what constituted problematic workplace behavior. Did other new employees receive similar guidance about watching for specific behavioral problems? I inquired, wondering about the scope of Marcus's intelligence-gathering operations. I asked a couple of other recent hires about their onboarding experiences with Marcus, Alex replied. They reported similar conversations, but with different employees as the focus of concern. It seemed like he was systematically gathering information about various people throughout the company, not just targeting you specifically. The revelation that I had been one of multiple employees subjected to Marcus's surveillance and potential investigation development was both reassuring and deeply concerning. The pattern suggested that his personal vendetta against me was part of a broader campaign to establish power and control within TechFlow's workplace dynamics through strategic use of his investigation authority. Why are you sharing this information with me? I asked, appreciating Alex's willingness to provide validation, but curious about his motivations for getting involved in what was clearly a complicated and potentially risky situation. Because what I witnessed was fundamentally wrong, Alex replied without hesitation. Using an investigation position to target specific employees through manufactured complaints and manipulated evidence is workplace harassment disguised as legitimate HR procedures. You deserve to know that your suspicions about the situation were accurate. Alex's confirmation of my assessment provided the external validation. I hadn't realized I needed to maintain confidence in my perceptions and decisions throughout the investigation process. The systematic nature of Marcus's campaign against me hadn't been paranoid interpretation of normal workplace challenges, but accurate recognition of sophisticated professional sabotage conducted through abuse of institutional authority. Our conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, with Alex providing additional details about Marcus's approach to employee consultations and his apparent strategy for identifying and exploiting workplace vulnerabilities. The information painted a picture of someone who had assumed his investigation role specifically to gain access to employee information and HR processes that could be weaponized for personal objectives. Have you considered reporting this information to TechFlow's leadership or filing complaints with employment regulatory agencies? Alex asked as our meeting concluded. The question addressed considerations I had been wrestling with since resigning from TechFlow. While Alex's testimony provided compelling evidence of Marcus's misconduct, pursuing formal complaints would require extensive time and resources with uncertain outcomes. Employment law cases were notoriously difficult to prove and often resulted in prolonged legal processes that were emotionally and financially draining for complainants. I've consulted with employment attorneys about potential options, I replied. The challenge is that proving deliberate misconduct rather than poor judgment requires extensive evidence and witness testimony that might be difficult to obtain. Most colleagues who were interviewed during the investigation believed they were participating in legitimate workplace assessment rather than contributing to targeted harassment. Alex nodded understanding, recognizing the practical difficulties involved in challenging sophisticated workplace manipulation conducted through official HR channels. His willingness to provide information had been motivated by concern for justice, rather than expectation that it would lead to immediate remedial action. As we prepared to leave Luna Cafe, Alex surprised me with an unexpected offer that would significantly change my professional trajectory over the coming months. Sarah, I don't know if you're interested, but the business development consulting firm I worked for before joining TechFlow is expanding their marketing strategy services, he said. Your background and experience would be valuable for several client projects they're developing. The work would be entirely independent contractor basis, which would give you flexibility while you decide about your next career steps. The opportunity Alex described represented exactly the kind of professional fresh start I needed to rebuild my career away from the toxic dynamics that had characterized my final months at TechFlow. Independent consulting would allow me to leverage my marketing expertise while avoiding the workplace politics and interpersonal complications that had made traditional employment problematic. I'm definitely interested in learning more about those opportunities, I replied, feeling the first genuine optimism about professional prospects since the investigation had begun. Would you be comfortable providing an introduction to the appropriate contacts at your former firm? Alex confirmed his willingness to facilitate introductions and suggested that we maintain regular contact as I explored consulting opportunities and considered long-term career directions. His support represented the kind of authentic professional relationship that I had valued at TechFlow before those connections were disrupted by Marcus's systematic campaign of sabotage. 6 months later, my independent consulting practice had developed into a thriving business with multiple clients who valued my strategic expertise and collaborative approach to marketing challenges. The flexibility and autonomy of consulting work proved to be professionally fulfilling in ways that traditional employment had never provided, allowing me to focus on creative problem-solving without navigating complex workplace politics or institutional constraints. The distance from TechFlow had also provided perspective on the experience that was both healing and educational. While Marcus's campaign against me had been professionally devastating in the short term, it had ultimately led to opportunities for growth and independence that might not have emerged if I had remained in traditional employment. Sometimes the worst experiences became catalysts for positive changes that wouldn't have occurred under more comfortable circumstances. Jessica and I maintained regular contact, with occasional updates about TechFlow developments and former colleagues' professional activities. Her friendship had been crucial support throughout the investigation process and continued to be valuable as I built my new career direction. She reported that Marcus remained in his investigation role and had conducted several additional employee investigations since my departure, though she wasn't aware of specific details about those cases. Robert Kim had reached out several times with potential job opportunities at other companies, expressing continued confidence in my professional capabilities and willingness to provide strong references for future employment. His support had been instrumental in establishing credibility with consulting clients who wanted to verify my track record and work style before engaging my services. The consulting work eventually led to a partnership opportunity with a boutique marketing agency that specialized in sustainable business strategy, exactly the kind of values-driven work that had originally attracted me to TechFlow's mission. The agency's collaborative culture and emphasis on authentic client relationships provided the professional environment I had been seeking throughout my career. 2 years after leaving TechFlow, I received an unexpected phone call from Linda Morrison, who had apparently been tracking my professional activities through industry connections and wanted to discuss potential opportunities for re-engagement with TechFlow's marketing initiatives. Sarah, I hope you've been well, Linda began. TechFlow has been expanding our sustainability marketing efforts, and several people have mentioned your consulting work in that area. We'd be interested in exploring potential contract opportunities if you'd be open to working with us again. The irony of TechFlow seeking my professional services after the investigation that had driven me from the company was not lost on me, but Linda's tone suggested genuine business interest rather than personal reconciliation attempts. The offer represented validation of my professional capabilities and market reputation that had been systematically attacked during the investigation process. I appreciate the inquiry, Linda, I replied carefully. However, Given the circumstances of my departure from TechFlow, I'm not sure that working together would be appropriate or productive for either party. Linda's response indicated understanding of my concerns, while also revealing changes in TechFlow's leadership and HR structure that had occurred since my resignation. Marcus Thompson had left the company 6 months earlier to pursue what was described as a better opportunity with a larger organization, though Linda's tone suggested that his departure might not have been entirely voluntary. "I understand your hesitation completely," Linda acknowledged. "The investigation process and circumstances surrounding your resignation were handled poorly, and I take responsibility for not addressing the conflict of interest concerns more definitively. If you'd be willing to consider contract work, we could structure arrangements that would minimize any potential for similar problems." The admission that the investigation had been handled poorly was more acknowledgement of error than I had expected from TechFlow's leadership. But it didn't change my assessment that returning to any professional relationship with the company would be inadvisable. The damage to trust and professional relationships couldn't be easily repaired through procedural changes or personnel modifications. "Thank you for the offer and the acknowledgement," I replied. "I wish TechFlow success with your sustainability initiatives, but I think it's best for everyone if I continue focusing on my current client relationships and business development." The conversation concluded amicably, with mutual expressions of professional respect and good wishes for future success. Linda's willingness to admit mistakes and extend opportunities for renewed collaboration suggested that some learning had occurred from the investigation debacle, though whether those insights would prevent similar problems for other employees remained uncertain. The experience with Marcus's systematic campaign of workplace harassment through abuse of HR investigation procedures had taught me valuable lessons about institutional vulnerability and the importance of documenting concerning patterns before they escalate into formal disciplinary actions. The sophistication of his approach demonstrated how easily workplace protection systems could be weaponized by individuals with personal motivations and institutional access. More importantly, the experience had reinforced my understanding that defending your professional worth and authentic work sometimes requires walking away from situations that cannot be reformed or corrected through conventional channels. The courage to leave TechFlow when the environment became untenable had ultimately led to professional opportunities and personal growth that wouldn't have been possible within the constraints of that increasingly toxic workplace. Standing up for yourself doesn't always mean fighting every battle or proving every point. Sometimes the most powerful response to systematic undermining is to remove yourself from the situation entirely and build something better independently. The investigation that was designed to destroy my professional reputation had instead become the catalyst for creating the career I had always wanted, but never had the courage to pursue. The consulting practice I built after leaving TechFlow grew into exactly the kind of values-driven, collaborative work environment I had been seeking throughout my career. Working with clients who genuinely valued strategic expertise and ethical business practices provided daily confirmation that there were professional contexts where authenticity and competence were recognized and rewarded rather than undermined and exploited. Sometimes the worst professional experiences become the foundation for the best professional opportunities, but only if you have the courage to recognize when a situation cannot be fixed, and the wisdom to build something new rather than continuing to fight battles in systems designed to ensure your defeat. Marcus had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of my career by making it impossible for me to remain in a situation that was ultimately limiting my potential for growth and authentic professional expression. The investigation that seemed like professional destruction had actually been professional liberation, freeing me to pursue work that aligned with my values and utilized my capabilities in ways that traditional employment never could have provided. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted in order to discover what you actually needed to thrive. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.